Watch the empty ground, folks. That's where the real story starts.
By the middle of August, a garden can fool you. The tomatoes are still coming in. The corn's standing tall, even if the bottom leaves have gone the color of a paper sack. Beans are hanging on the vines, and there's enough squash on the counter that nobody in the house is excited about squash anymore. It looks like abundance. But walk that garden slow, the way an older man walks it, and you notice something else. There are holes in the rows now, bare dirt where the early cabbage came out. The afternoons are still hot, but there's a coolness settling in around 4 in the morning that wasn't there in July. And that's what mattered to a mountain family, not the tomatoes, the calendar. Because the thing disappearing fastest in an August garden isn't the food, it's the time. For a lot of families in these mountains, August wasn't the end of the garden at all. It was planting season all over again. The second garden, the one that carried a household from summer abundance to winter scarcity. We're counting down 12 crops that went into that second garden. One reaches the table faster than almost anything else you'll ever plant. One gives you 2 different foods from a single seed. And the crop...
Read your own mountain first. Somebody else's calendar can fool you.
But number 1 can actually taste better after the kind of cold that kills the rest of the garden dead. One thing has to be said plain first. Appalachia is not one climate. It's a whole stack of them. In Tennessee alone, the growing season runs around 240 days in the low country and closer to 130 at the top of Mount LeConte. Same state. August in a river bottom and August 3,000 feet up a ridge are 2 different months wearing the same name. So when I say a crop went in the ground in August, I don't mean the 15th. Everywhere. For everybody. What matters isn't the date. It's how many growing days you have before your first hard frost, and how many days that seed needs to make food. And here's a piece of arithmetic most folks have never heard. A fall crop takes longer than the seed packet claims, because the days are shortening.
Now the clock matters. Let's start with the riskiest bet.
And the plant has less light to work with. Extension gardeners add 10 to 14 days to the days to maturity number on any fall planting. A 50-day turnip is really a 60-day turnip in September. All right, number 12. Number 12 is one last row of beans. That's a strange way to start, because a bean is not a fall crop. It's a summer crop that happens to still be alive. Frost doesn't set beans back. It finishes them. They sit at the tender end of the scale, right alongside tomatoes and corn. So why plant them in August? Because down in the lower valleys, where the first frost might hold off until the middle of October, a fast bush bean sown in the first week of August could still make a crop. Bush beans mature quicker than pole beans, and when you're racing a frost, quick is the entire point. Some years that paid. Some years the cold came early and you got nothing but vines. But understand what beans meant here. They weren't a side dish. Families grew them seriously, saved their own seed for generations, and gave varieties names that only meant something in a couple of hollows. And a bean that made it to harvest didn't have to be eaten that week. It could be strung on a thread with a needle and hung behind the stove until the pods shriveled. Leather breeches, they called them. Shucky beans in some places.
Next comes a safer idea. Make every empty patch earn something.
Dried like that, a summer crop turned into a winter meal. Still, a last row of beans is a bet against frost. It only works if you win. The safer strategy, the one that carries the rest of this list, wasn't outrunning the cold. It was planting things that didn't mind it. Number 11, green onions. This one looks small. It is small. That's exactly why it belongs. By August, a garden has gaps in it, and bare dirt in August is wasted ground. Green onions fill gaps. They don't need a row of their own. They go along the edge of a bed, at the end of a row, in whatever patch opened up last week. Quick, shallow-rooted, and comfortable in cool weather. Best of all, you harvest them the way you need them. Pull 3 for supper, leave the rest growing. That's a different arrangement than a tomato.
This crop starts cool, even while August still feels like summer.
Plant, which hands you 11 ripe tomatoes on a Tuesday, whether you're ready or not. And there's a habit hiding in here worth more than the onions themselves: succession planting. Don't put the whole packet in the ground on one day. Sow a little this week, a little 10 days from now, a little after that. If a hot spell kills the first sowing, the second is still coming. That isn't a gardening trick. That's risk management with a hoe. Number 10, lettuce. The first real contradiction of the fall garden. Lettuce is a cool weather crop. It wants cool soil and cool air, and it turns bitter and bolts the minute summer leans on it. Here's the catch. To eat lettuce in October, you have to start it in August, which means the coolest crop in the garden has to be born in the hottest soil it will ever see. And lettuce seed will refuse. That's not stubbornness. It's built in. Lettuce germinates best when the soil sits in the 50s and 60s. Once it climbs around 80 degrees, germination falls off hard, and a good bit of that seed will simply lie there and do nothing. And air temperature and soil temperature are not the same number.
When time gets short, speed can matter more than storage.
A pleasant 78-degree afternoon can be sitting on top of bare, dark ground baking at 95 in the sun. So every one of the old fixes was the same idea in different clothes. Get the seed cool. So where a taller crop throws afternoon shade. Sow a hair deeper than in spring. Keep the surface damp, because wet soil runs cooler than dry. That's the surprise nobody warned you about. The hardest part of a fall garden isn't the frost at the end. It's getting cool weather seed to come up while summer is still sitting on the ground. Number 9, radishes. Radishes are here for one reason: speed. A fall garden races two things: the frost, obviously, but also
One planting doing two jobs is a different kind of value.
the daylight. As the season goes on, the days shorten, and once you're under about 10 hours, plant growth pretty well stops until late winter. Whatever you planted has to be finished before then, or it sits there half-grown. Radishes are the fastest thing most gardeners will ever plant. Roughly 3 to 5 weeks from seed to something you'd actually eat. Nothing else here is close, and that makes them useful in a way people underestimate. A radish is never going to feed a family through the winter. What it does is put fresh food on the table in September while the slow crops are still working. It fills a gap in time, not a gap in the pantry. Number 8, beets. 2 foods from one planting. Most folks plant beets thinking about the root, but the leaves are food too, and they're ready a good while before the root is. Young beet greens can be cut when they're barely big enough to bother with. There's a rule attached, though.
Some crops
If you want the
hurry.
root as well, you can't
The
strip
next
the
one
plant.
earns its
Extension
keep
guidance
by
is to
waiting.
take only 1 or 2 leaves from a plant you intend to dig a root from, because it needs the rest of its foliage to feed that root. Take everything, and you'll have one fine mess of greens and a beet the size of a marble. Take a little, and you get both. The root is generally ready 6 to 8 weeks after planting, about golf ball size. Bigger is not better. Let a beet run too large and it goes woody. And here's the first hint of what runs through the back half of this list. Beets are semi-hardy. A light frost doesn't hurt them, and cool weather tends to improve them rather than ruin them. That's the first crack in the idea that cold is the enemy. Number 7, carrots. Carrots earn their place for a reason that has nothing to do with how fast they grow. Carrots are slow. In fall conditions, you're often looking at 70 days or more, and if you sow carrots too late in August at a high elevation, you'll get a row of orange threads and a lesson. But carrots do something no summer crop can do. They wait. A ripe tomato demands attention today. Ripe is ripe, and by tomorrow it's overripe. A carrot has a different temperament. Once it's grown, it can stay right where it is. Hard cold kills the tops back eventually, but the root underneath keeps fine. And if you mulch that row heavy with straw or leaves,
Here, frost stops being a deadline and starts sorting the survivors.
before the ground freezes, you can pull the mulch back and dig carrots well into the winter. That's an enormous thing for a household. The garden itself becomes the storage. No jars, no crock, no scramble of labor at harvest. The food waits in the dirt where it grew. Cold does something else to a carrot. As temperatures drop, The plant converts stored starch into sugar. Sugar in the tissue works something like antifreeze. And the carrot that comes out the other side tastes sweeter than the one you pulled in August. Families used root cellars and spring houses and boxes of damp sand. But the simplest cellar they ever had was the row itself. A crop that could wait was worth nearly as much as a crop that grew fast. Number 6, spinach. This is where the season turns over. Spinach is the first crop here that's actually better off because summer is ending. It's hardy, properly hardy. It sits in the same group as kale and collards and turnips, the crops that shrug off a heavy frost. The night that turns your tomato vine.
Hardiness helps, but families still wanted something fresh on the plate.
Vine's black and slimy leaves a spinach patch standing there looking mildly interested. It has the same heat problem as lettuce on the front end. Germination gets unreliable once the soil pushes past the upper 60s. There's an old fix that sounds odd and works. Chill the seed. Extension guidance suggests holding spinach seed in the refrigerator a week or two before a late summer sowing. And where winters are moderate, spinach does something remarkable. A late-sown patch that never had time to make a crop can survive the winter as small plants, under mulch or snow, doing absolutely nothing. Then take off the moment the light comes back. Plenty of folks who plant spinach in the fall take their biggest harvest the following March, which tells you something. The first frost of the year isn't one event. It's one event for tomatoes, and something else entirely for spinach. Number 5, mustard greens. Mustard is the fast one among the greens. It comes up quick, grows quick in cool weather, and you can be cutting young leaves in a matter of...
The next green doesn't just survive cold. Cold improves it.
Weeks, long before the roots and cabbages are close to ready. It has real history here, too. When the Park Service describes what farmers in the Great Smokies planted at the cold edges of the season, mustard greens are on the short list with onions, turnips, potatoes, and cabbage. I'll be honest about where mustard sits, though. It's not the toughest green in the patch. Generally rated semi-hardy, so it takes a light frost, but a hard freeze finishes it while kale and turnip greens are still going. Narrow window at both ends. So what was it for? Fresh food. And that is not a small thing. Dried beans and stored roots carry calories forward. They'll keep a family fed. But a plate of dried beans in November doesn't taste like anything is growing anywhere in the world. A mess of fresh greens does. The crops that put something green on a plate in cold weather were doing work that had nothing to do with calories. Number 4, kale. I'll say this at the front, because there's a fair amount of nonsense floating around. Kale is not an Appalachian vegetable. It's an old European crop that ended up everywhere. It's here for what it does, not where it came from. And what it does is the thing this whole...
A winter garden also needs crops that keep giving after harvest.
Video has been circling. Kale is hardy. It takes a heavy frost and keeps growing. Extension sources put kale and turnip greens down in the 15 to 20 degree range before cold finally takes them. The night that flattens a mustard patch doesn't finish kale. But surviving isn't the interesting part. Cold makes kale taste better. When temperatures drop, these plants convert starches into sugars, and the sugar lowers the freezing point inside the tissue. The same principle as salt on an icy road. It's a survival mechanism. The side effect is leaves that turn sweeter and lose some bitterness. Extension publications put it plainly. These greens benefit from frost, which increases the sugar content and the flavor of the leaves. Sit with that. A frost improves the crop. That's the shift a fall gardener has to make. In July, weather is a threat you defend against. By October, weather is a tool. If you planted the right things. You're not protecting plants from the cold. You're choosing plants that put it to work. Number 3, collards. Collards solve a different...
Now the garden is only half the job. The kitchen takes over.
problem. The harvest that only happens once. A cabbage gives you a cabbage. You cut it. The plant's job is over. Most of a garden works that way. One plant, one harvest, one meal. Collards don't. A collard grows up from a central stalk and keeps pushing new leaves out of the top, so you harvest from the bottom. Take the oldest, lowest leaves. A sharp downward pull snaps them off clean, and work up the plant over the following weeks. Extension guidance is to leave at least 4 healthy leaves at the growing crown and never damage the crown itself. Do that, and one plant keeps producing into late fall, and in a mild winter, well past it. Think about what that means for a household. That isn't a vegetable, that's a supply. 6 collard plants harvested that way feed a family more meals than a whole row of something you cut once, and it spreads the food across weeks, which is what you want when the question isn't how much you have today, but whether there'll be any in 6. Collards do the cold trick too. Frost improves them. There's a reason greens picked after the first hard snap ended up on so many tables around the holidays. Number 2, cabbage. With cabbage, the story stops being about the garden. Cabbage is a solid cool season crop where the season allows it.
Number 1 earns its place by solving several problems at once.
Across much of the South, it goes in as transplants in August for a fall harvest, though up at elevation the window gets tight. And cabbage is on the hardy list. A head of cabbage will take frost. But that's not why it's number 2. Cabbage is here because growing food is only half of a food system. The other half is what happens after harvest. A head of cabbage keeps a good while on its own in a cool, humid place. But shredded, salted, and packed down under its own juice, cabbage becomes kraut, and kraut keeps for months. That transformation is real chemistry, not folklore. The salt pulls juice out of the cabbage and makes a brine. Bacteria already living on the cabbage go to work in that brine and produce acid, and the acid preserves it. The tested proportion is 3 tablespoons of canning salt to 5 pounds of shredded cabbage. And that ratio isn't a matter of taste, it's a matter of safety. At 70 to 75 degrees, a crock ferments out in 3 to 4 weeks, which explains the timing. The cabbage came out in the fall, the house was still warm enough to work, and by the time real cold arrived, the kraut was made. Growing food gets you to harvest. Knowing what to do the week after harvest is what gets you to February, which brings us to number 1, the turnip. I know how that sounds. The turnip has spent 100 years being the vegetable people apologize for. But if you designed a crop from scratch for a family staring at an empty August row and a hard winter coming, you'd end up with something very close to a turnip. Start with timing.
History explains the habit. Usefulness explains why it lasted.
Extension planting guides across the South put turnip seed in the ground from roughly the 1st of August into September. Direct seeded. No transplanting, no equipment, no fuss. Then speed. A turnip generally runs 50 to 60 days to a usable root, and the greens are ready well.
If you've been counting vegetables, you've been watching the wrong thing.
Before that. Even with the short day adjustment added on, you're inside the window in most places. Then the part that makes it different from anything else here. 1 seed, 2 foods. You get turnip greens, and you get the turnip. Not a plant grown for greens or a plant grown for roots. The same plant at 2 stages of its life. Take a few outer leaves instead of stripping it bare, and you can eat greens in the fall and still dig a root later. 1 planting, adjusted to whatever kind of year it turned out to be. Then cold. Turnips are on the hardy list. Heavy frost doesn't finish them. And like the other roots, the tops can be killed while the root underneath keeps fine under a heavy mulch of hay or leaves. Then flavor. Cold sweetens a turnip the same way it sweetens a carrot. And then the history. When the Park Service writes about farming in the Great Smokies, turnip...
This system makes sense only when you expect something to fail.
Turnips are named directly among the cold-tolerant crops that went in ahead of the frost-free date. They even turn up in the old planting sayings the park recorded.
Those empty rows from the beginning were never really empty.
You don't get folklore about a crop nobody was growing, so put it all together. A turnip sown into an empty August row gave a family greens in about 6 weeks, roots in 8 or 9 that could sit in the ground until they were needed, and flavor that improved in exactly the weather that ended everything else. The same cold snap that turned a bean patch into black rags made the turnip patch better. A tomato does not negotiate with frost. A turnip has a different opinion entirely. Here's the thing I hope has been building this whole time. This was never a list of 12 vegetables. Look back at what each one did. The beans gambled against the calendar. The onions filled wasted ground.
Old knowledge survives when somebody uses it, then passes it along.
The lettuce had to be coaxed up in the heat. The radishes bought time. The beets gave 2 harvests from 1 sowing. The carrots turned the garden into a cellar. The spinach outlived the frost. The mustard put something green on a plate in November. The kale got better in the cold. The collards kept producing instead of quitting. The cabbage
Keep one lesson. Let the ground tell you what comes next.
became kraut. And the turnip did 5 of those at once. 12 different answers to one question. What happens when the food runs out? That's what gets lost when people romanticize old farms. Those families weren't planting a dozen things because they enjoyed variety. They were spreading risk. One grew fast, one stored, one kept making leaves, one tolerated cold, one could be preserved, one gave both greens and roots, because things went wrong. Frost came 3 weeks early. Seed sat in dry ground and never came up. Old gardeners weren't magic, they were hedged. The diversity wasn't a preference, it was the insurance policy. So go back to that late August garden from the beginning. Tired vines, corn browning at the edges, tomatoes still coming, but the plant's worn out and everybody knows it. And those bare gaps opening in the rows. At the start, that garden looks like something ending. Once you understand what those families were doing, it looks like something else. That empty row isn't the end of the summer garden. It's the opening of the second one. Good gardeners didn't ask how long summer was going to last. They asked what could still grow after summer quit cooperating. The most important winter work in a mountain garden happened in August, while the sun was still hot enough to run a man into the shade at 2 in the afternoon. Winter planning started while August was still hot. I'd like to hear from you on this one. Did your parents or grandparents put in a fall garden? And when a summer row opened up at your place, what went into it? Turnips? Mustard? One more row of beans? Leave it below. A good bit of what I know came from folks telling me what their people did. Here on Hank Harlan, this is what we spend our time on. Growing food, working soil, saving seed, and the old skills that used to be common knowledge around here. Take care of your ground.